Hey friends, Nicole here. All right, let's work on a little tutorial video. I'm going to teach you guys a little technique. There's a technique that I personally was just playing around with one night. Oops, throwing a pencil. Playing around with one night in my own head. I was kind of thinking about forecasting from the perspective of progressions and transits, secondary progressions and transits. And just sometimes when you're looking at a forecast, let's say you're forecasting like a presidential election, the more information you have, the more you're more likely to see patterns, and you can also triangulate things, and you just have more to work with. And being an astrologer, a big part of it, or practicing astrology, is sort of being a little investigator. But you have to start out with some sort of a hypothesis, something that you're trying to see if your gut instinct is supported by the chart, by the forecast. Okay, so I was thinking about one night about time and just thinking about dimensionality. So let me explain it to you guys like this. This is where my mind was, where it was at. I was thinking, you have a point, let's say, right? You have one point, and when you have a point, you have a single point in space, right? It doesn't have any dimension to it. Right? There's no dimension. It takes 2 points. With 2 points, then you have a line. There's a relationship between these two things that don't have any sort of dimensionality, but now they do. They form one dimension. Okay, and you then, of course, to move into 3 dimensions, you create, or 2 dimensions rather, you create like a square. Right? A square's got 4 sides, 4 lines that are together, and then to create a cube, you've got 6 squares that are forming the sides of the cube, right? And then that's 3 dimensions. So imagine we got our cube. I have a cube. It's got my coconut oil in it. It's lovely, I know. Coconut oil is, by the way, one of the best health and beauty secrets that is out there in the world. Okay, but let's say we have our 3-dimensional object, right? Time, which is obviously, it's a huge vital component, the study of astrology. That's what astrology is. It's the study of time. Time is, the 4th dimension. When you have an object and then it moves from one place to another, right? Moves from point A to point B. You then have time. If there's an absence of time, first of all, we wouldn't even be here, but everything would be frozen, right? Nothing would be moving. It's like we'd be missing a dimension. So let's imagine with our cube here, our coconut oil, that we're going to take a film. We're going to, an old-fashioned film camera. I know you millennial folks, not the digital camera, but the kind that you put the film in as like picture. It's like stop action. All right, so we're going to take a little video as I'm moving this. You're going to film it. And it's going to, if you were to pull the film out and look at it, develop it, you'd see picture of me moving. Coconut thing here, coconut, right? You'd have all these frames. How coconut thing got from here to how coconut thing got to here, A to B. It would create, if you had the ability to look at each frame of that little movie at the same time, that would be the 4th dimension. And it would sort of look like a worm or a snake or maybe even a string if you stretched it out even further. Like, if you filmed me moving this thing around for, I don't know, like an hour. When you hear the symbol of thread, or sort of the metaphor, I suppose, where we use thread or yarn or string to represent fate, this is showing you, it's not just symbolic, it's actually, I think, quite literal. It's showing you from birth until where you're at right now. You've created a string of all of these moments that have all happened, linearly, to get you to where you're at now. Astrology, when you're looking at a chart, it's like we've taken that string. Let's start with your birth. It's the beginning of our string. Okay? And I like to think of, I'll draw this on a piece of paper if I have a blank piece here. I'll just draw this real fast for you guys. Imagine your birth chart. You're used to seeing your chart like this, right? You're used to seeing it as a circle. If you were to think of, though, if you were to take your chart and then stack it up, for every single day, every second, every moment of your life, we could make an astrology chart for every moment if we really wanted to. We stack them all up and make a big, huge stack really high, or turn it sideways and you'd have a big string, right? And let's say you want to know, wow, what was happening and what was the quality of time for me on a particular date at a particular moment. You could pull it out that moment and you'd have a chart. It's like a cross section. So we got a big long worm, the days, all the moments of your life. And we can cut out a section, just like a snake, and then turn it sideways and like look at it, right? Okay. So I was thinking to myself, the number 2, depending on which tradition you look at, there's some cultures that traditionally saw 1, the number 1, as not being a real number. Okay, this is ancient. I think was it Chinese, something I was reading a while ago in my mythology books. But anyway, numbers didn't really begin until you got to number 2, because then you had a relationship. You had a line, right? Like you had, now that's a single dimension. That 1 is 1 dimension. A point by itself is kind of like 0, right? Aries, in fact, when I think of Aries, I think of the first house. To me, Aries is very much like the ascendant in a sense. It's like, okay, you've just been given the breath of life, you're animated. What are you going to do with it? You know, it's like, and so anyway, it's a very quick, simple starting point. But it's not until you come into form, come into a body, that you then have the opportunity to move through space and time and be alive and have experiences and grow. Okay, so if you were to think of our snake here, and we're to think of the day you were born, we know that date, it's concrete, we know the time, hopefully the place. This is something we can measure. We know the quality of time that you stepped into. Where you're at right now, we know that as well. We don't know when you're going to die necessarily. Some astrologers will look at that. I don't do that. I don't have enough hubris to want to pretend to, yeah. Anyway, so what that means is you have a relationship between your birth, you, when you're a baby, and now, today, right now. And because of that, we want to understand you've got progressions that you can, secondary progressions, which is where you take a year for every day of life. So when you're 4 days old as a baby, that's the equivalent, that chart on the 4th day after you're born is the one we would look at when you're 4 years old, okay? When you're 20 days old, that's the chart we look at. When you're 20 years old, that's your progressed chart, okay? That's one way. It's kind of a fractal, right? It's one way of looking at the motions of the planets. Another way is, of course, transits, which is just what's happening right now. There's a big clock, huge clock. It's really fun in the sky. Last night I went and stared at Jupiter for I don't know how long enough for him to move to get a couple of degrees. But anyway, so a few hours. Maybe not that long. I don't know. Anyway, that's our big clock. It's right outside. You can go look at it. You can go observe it every night. And the processes of nature are slow and they're steady and they're consistent and they might be boring to some people, especially nowadays, especially when we don't really need to rely on them as much as we used to for agriculture and whatnot. But point is, transits, you take the current transits and you look at them relative to your birth chart, and knowing the speeds of all of the different planets, it's going to show you these different cycles in a person's life and where they're at right now, and okay. This technique is one where you as an individual, you have a special relationship to today that's different than my relationship to today. We're different ages, we've had different experiences in different locations, etc. Why would I only just look at, people do these forecasts that have to do with the current weather, the transits. They're important. They're needed. That's like the stage that we're all dancing around on. It's the overall, it's what's happening in the world outside, the home. But also, it's not personal. It's collective. And I am kind of like, progressions are personal, yes, but something else. And so anyway, technique is taking your birth chart and taking the date that you're wanting to look at and creating a Davison chart, which in my mind is what a true composite should be. I don't really use composite charts. I play around with them, here and there, but I honestly, my experience with them, it doesn't make sense to me. It's a made up chart. It's midpoints, I think midpoints are important, but I feel like midpoints are more important in your own birth chart, your relationship, to your birth chart. And in relationship charts, I think you have 2 lives that have come together, right? That have been alive during certain trajectories in time, different ages and whatnot. Anyway, I think that it needs to have its own date. Your relationship has a midpoint, a date, a time, a geolocation between the two of you, between your births. I even like the idea, not to, just for those of you who are nerds, I like taking the progressed chart even. It's a progressed chart of two people and putting those together, right? Like when you first met each other, first meeting charts. Even just looking at, okay, I'm going to back up because I don't want to get you guys confused. That's for another video. So with this personal chart, what you're going to do, think of any day, any event in your life, in our little worm or our string or our caterpillar. What's something that, it's like a salami. Like what's something you'd want to slice and you want to feel bad about? I feel bad about like cutting an animal. But anyway, or like a tree, maybe feel bad too. Anyhow, pick that date, that moment. We got married. Okay, I want to look at my wedding date. How was I on that day? How did that affect me versus how did that affect my partner, right? I was here, they were here. And I thought, so anyway, I started playing around with this technique a couple of years ago, and it's incredibly like, whoa. It was just a whole other layer and level that was much more accurate. I don't know, it seems kind of, there might be tons of people out there doing this right now. I just haven't heard of anybody doing this. I just have found it to be, it gives you more information than just like with progression. Sometimes with your progress chart, honestly, like progress chart, a lot of times I'm kind of looking at it going, okay, the moon is about all I really focus on anyway. So with this technique, we're going to look at Jay-Z and Beyoncé at their wedding date. There's a bunch of ways you can do this with a couple. So I'm like throwing an extra layer of complexity into this. So me too. But first of all, you could take their Davison chart, their relationship chart together. Okay, that's the entity, that's the relationship. It's sort of seminal chart. This person was born and has this life potentiality, and this person has this. And put it together, and where do we meet in the middle? What does that look like, right? But that relationship itself also is like a snake, a string. It also has, it changes, it grows. Okay, the chart that you start with from the moment that relationship was begun, or Davison, planets move, so they're going to move, and it's going to change and grow. So I thought you can take the Davison of the relationship and look at it with today's date if you want to see, or there's a full moon, or there's a new moon, or something, and you're wondering, Mercury retrograde, right? And you want to see, how is this going to affect me? In fact, really awesome technique for that, right? Mercury retrograde coming up. Take your birth chart, take the date that Mercury stations retrograde, okay? Create a Davison. What does it look like? How is the third house looking? How is Mercury in that chart looking? What period of your life is going to take you back right to the middle? So it's like, it takes you back to that day that you'd lived just as many days up to that point until, as you have from that point to right here, which is kind of crazy. I do mine. I'm like in college. So I'm going, oh my gosh, I'm like the same. I've lived as much life since college as I had lived once I started college, got married and stuff. It's crazy. So, okay, I'm going to pause right here just because with my computer and whatnot. I'm going to do the Beyoncé Jay-Z video next. And we'll talk a little bit about each person, how their wedding day and that relationship chart that's created when you get married. Well, let me back up also. I didn't mention this. When you first meet someone, you first meet them, like touch them, you shake their hand, or there's a recognition of, hi, my name is blah, 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 like it's an actual, meeting. That's your first relationship chart, right? The first time the two people are intimate with each other, so first time they kiss each other, that creates a new chart. The first time they make love, that creates a new chart. And then if they get married, that creates a new chart, right? So you kind of are going to, if you have a crappy chart with someone, hopefully you can, in the future, progress to a new level where you recreate, you rebirth the relationship, and you go from there, okay? With these two, so what we're going to do, we're going to look at the relationship itself, and we're going to compare and contrast that. So the Davison chart, relationship Davison, to their wedding date. Right? So what does that look like? And then we're going to look at Beyoncé to the wedding date, and then we're going to look at Jay-Z to the wedding date. Okay. And by the way, I did Beyoncé. Her perspective on the relationship itself, you can do this too, is just Beyoncé, create a Davison, with the relationships Davison chart. There's her and Jay-Z. So it's them two, their chart, and her. I put it together, make a Davison. And it's my birthday, 1981, but it's my birthday. I was like, oh, that's great. Anyway, so that will give you information that has to do more with how does Beyonce see this relationship? You know, just kind of like overall, like from the time they're dating till now, it's her kind of her big picture of her perspective on the relationship, and also the potential the relationship has to help her in her path to grow, right? How it will affect her sort of psychological growth and spiritual growth. And then, but you can also look at her relationship to her wedding. That's different. Your wedding day is you're now tying yourself into a Capricorn Saturnian tradition that has to do with values that were here before you ever stepped onto the scene, commitment and tradition and rules, basically. Whole new theater. So it's different than how you just see the relationship in general. Okay. So this is really fun. All right, I'm gonna stop right here, and then we'll have a little part 2.